in the same class as his. His is magnificent. Mine is just my best effort. But they have one similarity, and that is that they each have one hypothesis or one theory, and then 35 each illustrating the one. In the case of Henry Hazlitt, you look at the long run as well as the short run, look at all the effects. In my case, just libertarianism, and what are the implications of that.
Okay. Another question of mine was, who are your biggest intellectual rivals? Specifically. Yeah. We know you have a lot of rivals. Yeah.
Rivals from within the libertarian movement or outside?
No, I guess outside. Yeah, outside.
Well, I guess Milton Friedman and Ronald Coase, Harold Dempseth, these are people that, like, I just wrote a thing that's going to come out on Rothwell.com. It's called Why I Write. And what I mentioned there is that take a guy like Paul Krugman. In a sense, he's an intellectual rival of mine. He's a Keynesian and certainly no libertarian, but I haven't focused my career on lefties like Keynes or Krugman, because to me it's sort of like shooting fish in a barrel. It's not really much fun. They're just, even though I mean he's a professor at Princeton, I guess, and he won the Nobel Prize in economics, I regard him as a moron. I mean, he's just a I really haven't spent much time criticizing him, but I have spent a lot more time criticizing people who are supposedly libertarians, like Milton Friedman or Friedrich Hayek or Ronald Coase. They would be the most famous of the ones that I've criticized. And what really gets me going with regard to them is that everyone else sees them as great libertarians, great free enterprises. James Buchanan, Gordon Tullock, I would add to that list. And I guess I would consider those people my main rivals. But, you know, one of the things that Austro-libertarian movement is accused of is being a cult. And Gary Becker, my old teacher at Columbia University, and James Buchanan have specifically said that we're a cult. And to me, a cult is like the Ayn Rand cult or the James Jones cult, the ones with the lemonade or whatever it is, the Kool-Aid. The key about a cult is you have a leader, and whatever the leader says, all the followers have to agree. And one of the benefits or one of the greatnesses of the Austrian libertarian movement is that we criticize each other. I criticize Mises, I criticize Rothbard, I criticize Hans Hoppe, I criticize Joe Salerno, I've criticized many of the leaders, they've criticized me, and we're all good friends, and we're all part of the same movement, which indicates that we're not a cult. So I would say pretty much every other leader of the Austrian libertarian movement is a rival of mine in the sense that we're all imperfect beings. None of us has got the truth with a capital T. We're all just striving to get 1/billionth of an inch closer to the proverbial truth with a capital T. So I've got rivals on the left like, I don't know, Galbraith or Krugman. I've got rivals within the right wing, such as Friedman and Hayek and Coase and people like that. And then I've got rivals right within the Mises University or the Mises Institute, people that I align myself with, people who I see as brothers of mine and sisters too. So I've got rivals all over the place. And hopefully you'll be one of my rivals because you're going to be a student of mine, and I like students who disagree with me, and we fight over things and we get closer to the truth.
I already give up, so I'm intimidated. All right. You told me when I was in New Orleans that there were some people that were trying to get you to debate Chomsky. Yeah. So if you could
Chomsky,
elaborate on that or what it would be about, I don't know. Tell us.
Well, you know, there's an interesting thing. Bob Murphy, who I regard as one of my very good friends and a colleague and also a rival, has an attempt to debate Paul Krugman. And what he did, I don't know if you people are aware of this, he sent out a message to us saying, look, donate money. I donated 100 or 200 to this. And if Paul Krugman agrees to debate me, then I'll call upon you to make good your pledge to give me the 100 or the 200 bucks that we pledged. And then we will donate it to Paul Krugman's favorite charity, I think the Poor Relief in New York City, something like that. So far, Paul Krugman has not condescended to debate him. And my understanding is that there are some people that are trying to get a debate between me and Chomsky. and are trying to do the same sort of thing, but I'm not sure how far that's gone or if it's gone anywhere. I'd be happy to debate Chomsky. He called himself a libertarian, and in some issues he's pretty good. I mean, he's anti-war, anti-U.S. imperialism, anti-foreign wars, and stuff like that. But on economics and politics, he's just horrible. He's a pinko socialist, commie, whatever. So I'd be happy to debate him, but so far that hasn't happened.
I think he says that people like yourself um, take libertarianism as it's a misnomer the way you guys use it. I'm not sure exactly why. I don't know if you guys have heard of that.
Yeah, it's because he's a mutualist, he's an anarchist left. So the classical term of libertarian applies to them. So the funny joke is that they believe as socialists that everything should be shared, and yet they can't share the word anarchy.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you.
Sure.
I can hear you perfectly, but the person who just spoke, I couldn't hear. It sort of faded in and out. So I would say if you're going to get anyone else to ask me a question, stand where you're standing.
Yeah, it wasn't.
So
it was just a comment. It was not necessarily a question.
Okay, well, if you want me to respond, then the person has to get closer to where you are, because I couldn't really hear it. I sort of heard every third word.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, this is my friend Pierre. I told you about him. He's the journalist. So he apparently has a question for you.
Sure.
Hello, Dr. Block.
Yeah.
I believe I would be one of the rare. Well, I believe I would be one of the rare fans you have from France. But my question is, can you develop on the idea that individuals cannot own nuclear weapons in a libertarian society?
Okay, that's a very good question, and I heard it very clearly. The issue is, is it legitimate to have a nuclear weapon? And I co-authored an article on that with my son, Matthew. And what we said is that, following Murray Rothbarian, as I've followed him on many, many things, a nuclear weapon is not a legitimate weapon because it can't be confined to guilty people. It has to necessarily kill masses of people. And what my son and I did in this article is we said if we lived in Jupiter, which is much bigger than the Earth, and there were only 10,000 of us, so that each person had property of as big as, I don't know, Europe or Africa, or bigger, then we could have nuclear weapons as long as they were in the middle of our territory, because then if they exploded, they wouldn't hit innocent people. And I also said that if we lived in telephone booths, nowadays what you young people do when you're in a nightclub, you have this thing called body surfing. You put a person above you and you sort of push them with your hands, right? And that's my understanding. Anyway, well, in our day, when I was a young pup, what we did is we'd have telephone booth stuffing contests. You know what a telephone booth is? You people might not even know what a telephone booth is. A telephone booth is about, I don't know, 4 feet, 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and maybe 7 feet tall, and you'd stuff people in the telephone booth. So if instead of living in Jupiter, where you could have nuclear weapons, we lived in telephone booths where we were just sort of touching each other, then not only couldn't you have a nuclear bomb, you couldn't even have a pistol or a knife, or even long fingernails would be a problem, because they couldn't be confined to guilty people. So it's sort of a geographical analysis of weapons, and the principle is that if it can be confined to guilty people, then it's a legitimate weapon. And if not, and it all depends on the context or the geography that we're in.
So, to resume, if I own the Sahara Desert, I would be entitled to the right.
I'm sorry. Say that again. I couldn't hear it.
So basically, if I owned the Sahara Desert or Antarctica, I could have a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, if you owned, say, all of Alaska or all of, I don't know, Africa or some gigantic area, and you put a nuclear weapon in the middle of it, such that if it exploded, its effects would be confined to you, then it would be legitimate. But my understanding, except maybe for Antarctica, there is no such place that any one person could own, and even Antarctica, the government's got its mitts on it. So for all intents and purposes, nuclear weapons would be illegitimate on Earth.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, Professor Block, there's another question. This one by
Sure.
Josh.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hey there. So, a couple quick questions for you. All right.
Could
So,
you do me a favor?
yeah.
Stand still and stand closer so I can read your, magnificent government protecting and serving the hell out of you. That's great. Okay, please ask the question.
Okay. So my first question is about privatization of roads. All right.
Yes,
I understand you wrote a book on privatizing roads and highways, and
yes.
recently I read Dr. Hoppe's new book, The Great Fiction, and he talks about how basically in order to start privatizing, one of the quick first main ways to do it would be through privatizing the roads. Because essentially that's how the government gets to either through for taxes, tell you what you can and can't do with your property, whether it's a home or whether it's a business, right? So in other words, what do you think is the best process or strategy, or a couple of strategies, to privatize roads?
You don't mean the best strategy. I think what you mean is the best way to do it,
The best
or do you mean
approach.
the best strategy to promote the idea?
Yeah, exactly, and how to actually get it done through a direct
Well,
approach.
let me answer both questions. I think I would answer each one differently, and I'm not sure which one you asked, but if I answer both, maybe I'll hit you with the correct question. The best strategy is to promote free enterprise, and if everyone was a libertarian, then we could do this. But how would you specifically do it? Well, these are great, great problems. The Soviet Union did it, not with roads, but they did it with factories, with collective farms. In Canada, I spent my summers in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and there was this thing called BCRIC, British Columbia Resources Investment Corporation, and what it had was a crown corporation, namely a sort of a government ownership of a bunch of forests and sawmills and mines and this and that and the other. And a conservative, semi-libertarian government came in and wanted to privatize it. And what they did is they gave 5 shares of this new private corporation to every citizen or resident of British Columbia. So that's one way to go. Just give it out to everybody. Now, if we had sort of had a God's eye view where God knew everything, what we would then do is give the roads and the streets back to the people whose taxes went into building the road. We don't have a God's eye perspective, so we really can't do that. But there are various ways of doing that. For example, let's take the I-10, the highway that leads from New Orleans to Pensacola and down south to Florida and goes all the way to the West Coast. Suppose we wanted to privatize just the I-10. What would we do, given that we can't figure out whose money went into creating it in the first place? Well, I think what we would do is look at it, maybe look at all the people that used it. The trucking companies, the cars that could prove that they used it a lot, or the gas stations, or all the people that had contiguous property to it, namely property touching on it, north and south of it, because it's an east-west road. And what we do is we say, okay, all you guys, all 100,000 of you people, and I'm just estimating, I don't know that it's 100,000, what we're going to do is give you the road. It's now the I-10 private corporation, and 100,000 people have 1 share each in it, namely you guys who are the owners of it, and that would be a way to privatize it. It's sort of like trying to unscramble the egg. You really can't do it fully justly. Perfection is denied us. We're on the wrong side of the Garden of Eden. But these are various possible ways of divvying it up. Another one, I didn't do it in this book, but who should get to own the Mississippi River or the Gulf of Mexico? Given that we want to have privatization of everything, and my motto is: if it moves, privatize it, and if it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. Well, we have to figure out how to privatize the Mississippi River, and nobody built that. Well, one way is to give shares to the people that are having those boats up and down it because of the idea of homesteading. They've been using the river. The people who've been drinking it, if you've been drinking it, or the people who own land on either side of the Mississippi River, and there might be, I don't know, 50,000 of those people, and now you have a new corporation called the Mississippi River Corporation. So you do the same thing for every street. It doesn't have to do, you don't have to do it street by street. There might be a neighborhood like Uptown where I live in New Orleans, and it's got, I don't know, maybe 20 streets going this way and 20 streets going that way, and you could maybe privatize all of them together and make the community Village in Manhattan, and all those streets running through Greenwich Village are privatized, or maybe all the Manhattan ones. These are very, very difficult questions as to how it should be done. And I'm hoping that my book and other people's efforts like Hans Hoppe's will lead people like you to start figuring it out. Well, maybe we shouldn't do it this way. Maybe we should do it that way. We have to look at the Soviet example. We have to look at the example of China where they're privatizing and now apply it to much more radical things like roads and rivers and lakes and oceans.
And I think maybe Dr. Hoppe also mentioned maybe like people who pay the most maybe in taxes, or people who paid or did the most to actually maintain the road.
Yeah, that would certainly be a method that would be very consistent with what I'm saying. Only my view is that it's very difficult to find out. But if we could find out who paid the taxes, nobody paid the taxes for the Mississippi River, so we wouldn't work there. But if we could figure out whose taxes went into the I-10 or the I-20 or the I-55 or whatever these roads are, or Broadway in whatever city, then that would be much better. But if we couldn't, then I'm suggesting these sort of things like the Soviet Union, give factories to the people that work there, because the theory is homesteading, the Lockean, Rothbarian, Hoppean theory of homesteading would be the people that mix their labor with the land or the factory or the farm or the rightful owner.
Okay, so then my other question for you is, if you compare like Western civilization, let's say right now what they call the PIGS countries, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. All right, they have massive GDP to debt ratios, massive, high unemployment. The social system and government is just collapsing, of course. Massive fire bombings in the streets by the people against the government and riots and protests. I mean, it's wild. All right. So if the U.S. is getting up higher to the debt to GDP ratio and its social system is collapsing, and then at the same time, just like in Western Europe, and at the same time, Homeland Security, the federal government, is loading up with large amounts of ammunition, guns, weapons, SWAT teams, everything you possibly think of. The NSA, spying. Do you think that you can actually see a massive meltdown actually occur in the U.S. like it's going on in Europe right now? And if so, what do you think maybe possibly a timeline is? That the U.S. maybe is a few years behind, lagging in regards to a collapse like they're going through, or what exactly?
Well, I think Obama's doing his best to catch us up to where Greece is.
Right.
And I see the U.S., or rather I see Greece as the U.S. in 5, 10, 20 years, I'm not sure when. Happily, the U.S. is more free than most of those European countries, although I did a study with Bortney and Lawson for the Fraser Institute when I was working there on the economic freedom of the various countries in the world. And when I started in '76, I think the fourth freest country was the United States. And my recollection might be wrong, but I think it was Hong Kong, Singapore, and Switzerland were the first three in terms of freedom. Now the U.S. has gone down to about 11th or 13th or something like that. Many other countries are more economically free than the U.S., including those three and others that have catapulted over the U.S. So the U.S. is moving down toward Greece, and it's a crying shame. It's too bad that Ron Paul wasn't elected president. If he was, I think we would have moved a little bit up toward the Singapore and Hong Kong in terms of economic freedom. So, yes, I see our future in that direction unless we have some sort of change. And I'm very comforted by Ron Paul's success. He's got thousands of young people who will be the future of the country, who are looking at things in a little bit more of a free enterprise libertarian way. So I think that you're right that with all these problems, the U.S. is headed down that path. Although, one of the big problems that they have in Europe is the vast unemployment of young people. People under 25, the people under 20 are unemployed, and young people when they're unemployed are bored and they get into trouble, get into riots, what have you. Of course, one of the main reasons for this is the minimum wage law, and yet when you ask people about the minimum wage law, they all favor it because they think that minimum wage law raises wages, and who could be against raising wages if you don't, you're very callous and you don't care about the poor. But we know, those of us that have had any economics at all, that when you artificially raise wages above productivity levels, you create unemployment. Well, my understanding just recently, a week or two, is that somebody in Spain, in the central bank of Spain, all central banks ought to be eliminated, but he made a good point. I think it was the central bank in Spain, where he said we ought to get rid of the minimum wage, which is just a great break in the ice. So hopefully there's hope, and you know, the case for optimism, there's a case for pessimism. Which way it'll break, it's hard to know, but it'll break in a way that we push, or we can have some effect on that.
Right, and recently I've read a Dr. Joseph Salerno piece on LiberalArticle.com. This is like, I don't know, maybe October or something of last year. And he was saying, he was talking about the Roman Empire, the British, the French. And it basically just says, well, look, whenever you have more of the economic collapse, then of course they start leading you to war. And then of course people have the rally around the leader effect. And so potentially you may see more wars coming with the U.S. and wars of foreign aggression because of the collapse in order to take people's eyes off of the economy and it's not recovering. And then of course, the Federal Reserve therefore would have to inflate the currency in order to pay for the wars. Devaluation of the money supply, higher inflation, more taxes. And then of course people realize, well, hey, wait a minute, we're getting screwed by the ruling elite essentially. All right. So whenever that occurs, that's potentially you see the massive protests going on. That their futures are being basically, indebted away. You know, What's your take on
Yes,
that?
I certainly agree with you. Joe Salerno is one of my favorite economists, and I think he makes a very good point that the central banks and inflation. I mean, look, if inflation would work, Zimbabwe would be a great country. They'd be very rich. People, have on their desks $1 trillion Zimbabwean dollars or something. I mean, you think we'd have learned from the 1923 hyperinflation of Germany, but somehow Bernanke hasn't learned, or what have you. Hopefully there'll be a new person, although he'll be appointed by Obama, so I can't imagine it'll be any good. But there's this guy Glub Pasha, Glubb Pasha, Pasha, who wrote that various groups last for only 200 years. The Roman Empire, 200 years, the British Empire, 200 years. Maybe it's the U.S.'s turn, and maybe there'll be some other country that will take over China, or, I mean, it might be in some ways that China and Russia are more free enterprise than the United States, although this is a very subjective kind of thing. I can't really say that, but it's a possibility. But certainly Hong Kong and Singapore and those countries are more free enterprise than the U.S., and the more free enterprise, the wealthier, and the wealthier, the more leadership of the world that you're going to get.
Okay, and one last thing. Do you think that if there isn't, the collapse obviously will continue to occur with the U.S. Either inflation, the interest rate will be increased, further collapse of Social Security, that sort of thing. Do you think maybe more government abuse of their powers, like the NSA wiretapping, whatever causes, a further collapse of the U.S. empire? Do you think that could potentially be a cause or a catalyst for secession in the U.S.? Maybe you'd have New York City or Chicago being free cities. Maybe you'd have the Northwest becoming its own, regional country. Or might be becoming a free city as well. I promoted that. What do you think about that one?
Well, there is Tom Woods has wrote a book about nullification, which I think is a very good idea, that jury nullification, and states can nullify things like what is it? Washington State and Colorado have legalized marijuana, and the federal government doesn't much like that, and you're going to have some sort of a problem. Unfortunately, we had a war of northern aggression in 1861, which in most people's minds settled issues, that we shouldn't have secession. But I think that secession is a very important thing, but unless people's hearts and minds have changed, we're not going to get any succession. So I think it's just we have to keep pamphleteering and writing and publicizing and writing books and giving public speeches and engaging in the political process to try to change people's minds. And when people's minds have changed, either we won't need nullification, or we won't need secession, or we will be able to have that done. My understanding is that in Colorado, I think the northeastern county of, I'm not sure which county of Colorado wants to secede from Colorado because of the gun controls. And there's a movement in Vermont or New Hampshire, I think Vermont, to secede from the Union. You know, secession has a very bad press because people think that if you favor secession, you favor slavery. But the first state that wanted to secede from the Union was Massachusetts in 1825 or so, 1830. And the reason they wanted to secede is because the U.S. supported slavery, and there you had a bunch of abolitionists who wanted to secede as an anti-slavery measure. So this conflation of secession and slavery is just nonsense. I certainly favor secession as an anarchist down to the individual level. Instead of having a country of 350 million people, we should have 350 million countries in the United States. Each of us should be sovereign. That would be the ideal.
Right, and you become King Block, right? All right, thanks, man.
Hey, Dr. Block. Okay, I have some more questions for you.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, can you tell us who you consider the biggest frauds? In other words, those who contradict what they say. I'll give you some examples. Um, Friedman is looked upon by the mainstream as I don't know, a free market guy. Even F.A. Hayek, which I'm sure some people here like, and I like some of his stuff. But you've also criticized him and exposed him for not not really being a free market tier advocate. And then another example would be Ronald Reagan. He's known as a fiscal conservative, but he tripled the debt. He increased, he raised the debt ceiling. What was it, 17 times? He did all, he raised taxes and all that. So I was hoping you can expose some of them and maybe even rank them. I don't know.
Well, I know about ranking. You're really into ranking.
I'm an ordinal guy. That's why.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
I'm an
you.
ordinal guy, not a cardinal guy.
Okay. That's good.
Not everyone got that, but I know you did.
Yes, I got that. Sort of Austrian joke. Ronald Reagan was a great pamphleteer, a great speaker in terms of liberty. I mean, he really was, some of his speeches were magnificent. And yet, when he was governor of California, the budget increased. When he was the president of the United States, the budget increased. So he was hypocritical, or he wasn't taking care of business, or whatever. Milton Friedman favors the negative income tax, which is welfare system. He supported this withholding tax, which makes the income tax work more efficiently. Instead of taking a gigantic bill in April 15th, you pay every week and it hurts less. He later apologized for that, but still he was instrumental in that. Even his, and here I'm going to say something rather controversial, because one of the things that he's known for as a good thing was his attack on the draft, the military draft. But he did this in order to make the Vietnam War more efficient from the U.S. side. What he said was, if you draft people, then you get people from Harvard and Princeton who are protesting, and you can't beat their heads in for obvious reasons because they're part of the ruling class. And what he said was that the draft was a way of slowing down the efficiency of the U.S. war machine, and the U.S. war machine should be made more efficient. Now, look, I don't favor the draft, but I certainly don't oppose it on the grounds that opposing it will make the U.S. imperialist war in Vietnam more efficient. So this is a grave problem that I have with Milton Friedman. One of the articles I wrote about him is I said, look, suppose we had concentration camps in Germany, and instead of hiring voluntary concentration camp guards to torture the people and kill them, we drafted them. And their hearts weren't really into the thing, and they weren't killing people with as much enthusiasm as they could. And we libertarians in Germany said, well, instead of drafting them, we should hire them. And you call that free enterprise? You call that libertarian? That's crazy. The obvious answer is, get rid of the concentration camps, and you don't have to hire them at all. Or get rid of the U.S. Army in Vietnam and just make it a defensive army, a very powerful Coast Guard or something, and don't get involved in armies all over the place. As Ron Paul never tires of telling us, we have, 1,000 military bases in 160 different countries. If any other country did anything like that, we would see clearly what's going on. Yet you go through the airports and people start applauding soldiers. It's just crazy. Another Milton Friedman thing is the Fed. He favored the Fed. He opposed the gold standard. He favored the fiat currency. The voucher system, the libertarian view, as I understand, is privatize education. And Friedman is, talking about vouchers to make government schools work more efficiently. So Mises called him not an economist but a statistician, and I would say he wasn't a libertarian, but rather he was an efficiency expert for the state. He didn't see the state as an evil institution, one that violates the non-aggression principle. For Friedman, Milton Friedman, not David Friedman, his son, who's a lot better on these things, but for Milton Friedman, the state is just, another organization that we should try to make run more efficiently. And from a libertarian point of view, I think that's all wrong. Hayek, in his Road to Serfdom, gave away the store. He compromised all over the place. Yes, we should get rid of rent control, but phase it out. Yes, the minimum wage law. Unionism isn't so bad. He just compromised all over the place. And I wrote this article attacking him, and then Milton Friedman and I got into it. And if any of you people want to get in on this, just email me about these controversies, and I'll send you the debates I've had with Friedman and Hayek over these things. So I think Friedman and Hayek and Ronald Reagan were seen as free enterprises. I mean, if they were seen as the pinkos that they are, well, I shouldn't say it because they did do some good things. I mean, Ronald Reagan, his rhetoric was magnificent. Milton Friedman was magnificent on I don't know, rent control, minimum wage, free trade, government regulations. I mean, there's a reason why Friedman and Hayek were considered free enterprise. They must have done something good. But my problem is that they did a lot of things bad as well.
Okay. Pierre has another question.
Hi, I'm back.
Hey.
I wanted to ask you. Okay, I'm pretty sure only a few of us over here believe in the global warming theory. But let's assume that there is such a thing as global warming. How, in a libertarian society, would you answer that? The problem of global warming. How would you end global warming?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me talk a little about global warming. First of all, these people, they have the indictment clear. Capitalism is guilty. They just keep changing they have the verdict clear. The indictment keeps changing. In the 1970s, they were saying, Paul Ehrlich and all these guys were saying, well, it's global cooling, and therefore it's the fault of greed and capitalism and private enterprise. Then in the 90s, they started saying it's global warming. And they would go to some conference that would have to be canceled because of ice and sleet. So then they changed their mind again, and now they're not either global warming or global cooling, it's climate change. These guys are charlatans. I mean, they never said what the temperature of the Earth should be. And then there's this whole thing about ClimateGate, where they were caught with their pants around their ankles. The leaders of these groups, the East Anglia group, which is in charge of keeping the global temperature records, are fudging it and making it appear different than it is. So we really can't say, and the burden of proof rests on them. If there is global warming, the burden of proof, they have to prove it, and they've not done that. They've never got a list of 99% of the climatologists or meteorologists or physicists say anything like that. And then what they do is people who disagree, they try to ruin their careers and not let them get published. But let me get back to your question. Suppose it were true. Suppose it were true that not only do we have global warming and we're all going to fry, or global cooling and we're all going to freeze to death. What's that other one where there's that hole, the ozone layer, and we're all going to get cancer because the ozone isn't protecting us? Look, if that were true, and it could be proven, then we libertarians, I think, would have to say that engaging in Freon refrigerators or underarm deodorant or whatever the bad things are would be like taking a pistol and shooting somebody. We would have to have rules saying that you can't use coal or whatever the rules are that would reduce or increase the heat. So if this can be proven, it would be a limitation on us because we are engaging in violation of property rights and personal rights of other people. Like, take the case of Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary was an innocent woman. She had no mens rea is guilty conscience. She didn't even know she had typhoid, and she's out there giving food and spreading the typhoid. Well, she's an innocent person, but you don't put her in jail, but you have to quarantine her. You can't let her out there giving other people typhoid. So if global warming or using Freon or whatever it is that the environmentalists, these, I call them the watermelons because they're really green on the outside but red on the inside. If they could prove their case, then a lot of industry would be like Typhoid Mary. But then there's one other thing. The question of the meteor. You know, every once in a while some big meteor comes. I think one just hit Russia. Not a real big one, not as big as a car or a truck, and they said it was like twice the size of the atom bomb in terms of harm. And every once in a while, there's a real big meteor or an asteroid that paid for the dinosaurs. I think the Gulf of Mexico was created by this one. I'm a little weak on biology and history here, but work with me. Look, suppose we have a meteor, and there was this movie about a meteor was going to hit the Earth, and we had to send our boys up there to sort of steer it away or pulverize it. Well, you see, there are not just one danger to the Earth, but two dangers. One danger is we're going to suffocate in our own pollution or our own global warming. The other one is we're going to hit by a meteor. Now, if the only problem is that it's global warming or ozone layer, well, then we have to reduce industry. But on the other hand, if we're worried about the meteor, then we have to increase industry because the only way we're going to get that meteor or asteroid is to be able to, I don't know, go up with a rocket ship or shoot it from here or something like that, which means high tech. So even if these rascals can prove their case, it by no means follows that we should adhere to their public policy prescriptions because of the opposite danger, the danger that calls as a safeguard for more industry. So it's a very complicated issue. My favorite piece on this is a thing written by Murray Rothbard. It's called Air Pollution. I forget the whole thing, but if you Google Murray Rothbard and air pollution, you will come up with a 75-page essay, which is the best thing ever written on environmentalism.
Thank you very much.
My question.
No? Okay. Hector Roos has a question for you as well.
Sure.
Dr. Block.
Hey.
He wrote it on his hand.
Yeah, yes. Want to know what's your opinion on the biggest past debates? What was the most important of the past debates in Austrian economics that was resolved, and what is the most important questions that have not been resolved yet in the Austrian school? For example,
I heard the second question. What is the most important issue that's not been resolved in the Austrian school?
yes. For example, when you had developments in the early school about price theory, what is the big hoorah today that has not been resolved or is still in debate?
Well, I think one of the other one that comes from mind, that's a very good question, I think is the question of fractional reserve banking. There are Austrians in good standing, Larry White, George Selgin, the people around SDAE, the Society for the Development of Austrian Economics, the economists at George Mason, Horowitz. These people think that fractional reserve banking is fine, is okay, is not problematic, whereas the Rothbarian types, the people surrounding the Mises Institute, would say that the fractional reserve banking creates the business cycle, and that would be a positive issue, and the normative issue would be that it creates the that it's fraudulent. So I would say that that's one big debate, and if any of you are really interested in that, again, email me on that, and I will give you a bibliography of about 50 articles on each side of this issue. And what we need is new young minds to come and set us old fogies straight and come up with new ideas as to, and by the way, take my side of this because we're correct. I'm kidding. Take whatever side you want on that. But that would be one debate within the Austrian community that has not been resolved because there are very good people on both sides of this. Another debate within the libertarian movement is what about immigration? There are people like Hans Hoppe who say we shouldn't have open borders, where we should have very strict immigration controls, and then there are people like me who say that we should have open borders. My idea is that we privatize everything. Then, if somebody comes in without, well, let me start again. What Hans Hoppe says on this is there are three elements of international trade. One is the movement of people, the movement of goods, and the movement of investment. And he says with regard to the two of these, investment and goods, there are two parties. There's the investor and the investee, there's the exporter and the importer. But with regard to immigration, there's no two people agreeing. It's just some guy shows up on these shores and there he is. And Hans says that, well, we shouldn't have that. And Murray Rothbard agrees with him on that, or at least he changed his mind and he took Hans Hoppe's position later in his life. And my idea is, let's privatize every square inch of the United States, and now there has to be two people, an immigrant and a recipient. Namely, if I want to immigrate, say, from Canada or from Costa Rica into Florida, I have to have some Floridian willing to let me come to his property. So I think that's another issue of debate. A third issue of debate is voluntary slavery. I believe that you have a right to sell yourself into slavery if you want. The only libertarian that has ever written, I think, on this is Robert Nozick, that agrees with me. Every other one disagrees with me on that one. And one other issue, abortion. Abortion is a very, very complicated issue. I was in your state in Florida. Were any of you at the Tampa thing, the Ron Paul thing in Tampa? And I gave a speech there, and I was booed by a lot of people. You must remember that. So abortion is another issue where Ron Paul takes one position, Murray Rothbard takes another position. I think I take the only correct position, namely neither pro-life nor pro-choice, but rather evictionism. The idea is that you can't, an abortion is a two-stage thing. One, you evict, and two, you kill. And what I'm saying is the woman has a right to evict at any time, even if it means killing, but never to abort. So if we adopted my policy on that, at one fell swoop, we would save one-third of babies, babies in the third trimester who were viable outside of the womb. So those are some of the controversies in the Austro-Libertarian movement.
Dr. Block, isn't there another one? Like, I guess the trouble with libertarianism, applying the non-aggression principle to the animal kingdom?
Yes, I suppose that I don't think that's much of a controversy. I don't think there are too many people that think we should eat animals. I suppose it's somewhat of a controversy, but these other controversies, you've got a lot of people with great prestige within the movement that are on both sides of the issue. I don't think that there are too many people, like there's this latest thing in the newspaper today, my understanding of cancer, and again, I'm an economist, I'm not a doctor, my understanding of cancer is that there are 100 different kinds of cancer and 100 different kinds of cures for cancer, or remedies for cancer, and the big problem is to try to match the cure with the specific cancer that a person has. Well, anyway, in the newspaper just today, there was this case of some guy, 55 years old or so, who had cancer and was told that he had a couple of weeks to live. What they did is they took a biopsy out of him and they put it into 100 different mice. And then they tried all sorts of cures from mice who developed cancer based on his biopsy. And they found something, and now he's fine. Now, the PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, would say, well, you're using aggression against mice. Well, are you a man or a mouse? I'm a humanist. I favor humans over mice. And I think it's just a wonderful thing that they're coming up with a cure for this poor guy who's given 2 or 3 weeks to live. And so I don't really see that as much of a.
Thank you, Dr. Block. One last question. What do you see in terms of the future of money? We have Bitcoin coming out. We have in Switzerland, they sponsor these digital gold coins, and you have other digital transactions involving gold. What do you see in terms of the future of money, or if there's even going to be money in the future? I'm sure that question comes up a lot.
Well, hopefully there'll be money in the future, because if no money, then we're going to have double coincidence of wants and we're back in the quarter. And if we didn't have money, what is it? We now have 7 billion people on the planet. I would say without money, maybe 70,000 people could live on the planet, or maybe 700,000 people. Maybe 99.9% of all people would die if we didn't have money, because money enables trade, and trade enables specialization and division of labor. And without that, we're all going to die, or virtually all of us are going to die. So we absolutely must have money, and what we've got to do is take the money out of the evil hands of the state and turn it to the free enterprise system. And whenever there's been a competition between the various objects that could serve as a money, gold won out, or sometimes silver, but mainly gold. So I think that contrary to Milton Friedman and other so-called free enterprises, either the future of money is with gold or there's no future.
Dr. Block, what do you think about Bitcoin in terms of, or other digital currency?
Well, Lewis has been into ranking, and I'd like to engage in some ranking now. Gold is number one. Bitcoin or any other thing other than government is number two, and then government is a long way third. I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin violates the Hungarian. Wenger was the first thought of Austrian economics. Violates the idea that money has to come in being as a valuable commodity, and Bitcoin it's sort of a late period value. The way you get a Bitcoin is by solving mathematical problems, but solving not good mathematical problems that will help us, but just solving mathematical problems for the purpose of having money is just silly. It's like Keynes digging holes and filling them up again or something like that. So I rank Bitcoin way above government. I'd rather have Bitcoin than what we now have, but I think that namely gold would be better than.
Okay, great. Hey, a couple more questions for you, Dr. Block.
Sure.
So number one, I understand that Laissez-Faire Book Club is actually going to be producing your book. Let's see here, Defending the Undefendable 2. Is that right?
No, not laissez-faire books. Julian Tanasi is coming out with Defending Undefendable 2. It ought to be out by June, another couple of days.
Great.
I am working on Defending 3 and Defending 4 right now, or I was before I got into this. I'm hoping to have a series of defendings, because there's lots of stuff to be defended.
Right, and it's going to have chapters like on, like midget tossing and women showing their breasts in public, right? You mentioned.
Midget tossing is one of the chapters in the forthcoming one. I think I had a list around here somewhere of the chapters in the next one. Here we go. Here are the chapters in Defending 2. The multinational enterprise of the smuggler, British Petroleum, because of the oil spill, nuclear energy, the corporate raider, hatchet man, home worker, that's the person that works at home, picket line crosser, daycare provider, automator, the smoker, human organ merchant, breast milk substitute purveyor, going topless in public, polygamous marriage, the sexist, peeping Tom, the ageist, the homophobe, the stereotyper, the war toy manufacturer. Little kids now are getting in trouble for bringing a war toy to school. It's crazy. Or a pistol or a plastic gun. The colorizer, person who colorizes black and white movies. The baby seller, markets in baby adoption. Heritage building destroyer. The bad Samaritan, the duelist, the person who duels. The executioner, defending the death penalty. The dwarf thrower, and the intellectual property denier. That's 30 different chapters. So be the first on your block to get this great book.
Right, definitely, man. And my second thing for you is you take, for example, like WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, Bradley Manning being on trial for releasing top secret info about U.S. war crimes. Maybe the recent scandal with the NSA and the guy coming out and now in I think Hong Kong. But what I'm trying to get at though is, what do you think about whenever the statists or the court intellectuals who obviously are paid off by the ruling elite, when they say, especially on the news, you see it all the time with the prostitutes, they say, well, wait a minute, you know, because this person released secrets, they're a traitor because it could have harmed people in the field. It could have harmed, spies, secret agents, that sort of thing, or soldiers. What do you think about that in regards to, I understand you promote and you support, of course, more information about the government coming out like that, but what do you think, top secret info, but what do you think about the counter argument that the state is using of, well, hey, it put lives at risk?
Well, I'm a professor, so I'm not allowed to answer questions directly, so I'll answer this one indirectly. In my book on Ron Paul, what I did was to try to promote his candidacy, and one of the chapters I had was, who would Ron Paul pick for the Supreme Court? This was an attempt to, focus interest on Ron Paul's candidacy, and one of the people that I suggested was, what's his name? Epstein, Richard Epstein. And Richard Epstein just came out with this horrendous thing with a guy from Cato. I think they're both from Cato. Richard Epstein is a Catoite. And they attacked Snowden, and they attacked Bradley Manning, and they attacked Assange for very much the reasons that you're giving, that it harms the U.S. and that it's a violation of their sacred vows. Well, now I'll get back to answering your question. I had to get off on that a little bit. Look, you can't have a legitimate contract with an illegitimate organization. The government is an illegitimate organization because they violate the non-aggression principle. We never agreed to have the government. The government is not a country club. The government is not a chess club or something like that we've agreed to pay dues to. So taxes are theft. These people are a bunch of robbers. They're also a bunch of murderers. There's this guy, R.J. Rummel, Rummel, who wrote a book of, saying that 173 million people were killed in the last century by governments, not in wars. You get additional, just killing their own citizens. So these people are mass murderers and they're thieves, and to say that a contract with them is binding, it's crazy. It's under duress. You can't have a contract with a criminal organization that is binding on you. And as for harming people, who is harming people? Assange and Bradley Manning and Snowden are trying to get the U.S. to stop murdering people. They're sending off drones to kill people. So as far as I'm concerned, they're heroes, and I certainly will put them in defending 3 or defending 4. I'm a big fan of the 3 of them. They might not be libertarians, but they're heroic. They're called traitors. They're called everything under the sun negative by the ruling class people. I'm a big fan of these people. I think they're heroic. I take my hat off to them. I think they're great, and what they're doing is saving lives. They're not endangering lives. They're on net balance, they're saving lives, because if they can keep the U.S. Nowadays, I think the U.S. is going into Syria now. We're going to repeat what we did with Iraq and Iraq and Afghanistan, and now Syria, and we just did Libya. Look, the U.S., these are the people that try to deliver the mail. These are the people that are in charge of the motor vehicle licensing board. These people are incompetent. What makes us think that they're incompetent in domestic policy and somehow in foreign policy they're okay? So I see these whistleblowers as heroes.
Right, and to just add to that, I mean, I found it extremely bizarre. It's like on one hand, they think, well, Obama and the rest of the people in the federal government domestically, they love kids. They talk about kids all the time. We need to have more money for public education. But internationally, they're killing children overseas in Afghanistan. So it's like, well, how can Obama say, well, I support kids and more education? We got to, but then, so what? Kids in Afghanistan don't matter when they kill them with drones, and then.
They're just ragheads. They don't count.
Right.
Madeleine Albright was asked, she was told that, what was it, 500,000 kids were killed in Iraq, and was this worth it? And she said, yeah, it was worth it.
Right.
Well, how would you feel if her kids were killed, or if she has kids, or nephews or nieces? I mean, this is just horrible. The U.S. looks upon people as ragheads, or, sand bunnies, or whatever they call them, and they kill them with reckless abandon. But the U.S. is the only one that dropped an atom bomb on innocent people. The U.S. is a mass murderer. The U.S. is one of the worst countries in the world. No other country has dropped an atom bomb on people, and they didn't have to do it to win World War II. And there wouldn't have been a World War II if we didn't get into World War I, which is a whole other issue. The rise of Hitler came about because of the Versailles Treaty. So the U.S. is just the baddest guys on the planet. They're not us, they're the bad guys. So I think Assange and Bradley Manning, who's been in jail for 3 years now with no accusation, and his trial is just coming up. We ought to free all these guys, and we ought to give them Nobel Peace Prizes. Instead, who do we give a Nobel Peace Prize to? Not that I'm against Obama so much, because I think that, I favored Obama over Mitt Romney in the last election, and I favored Obama over McCain in the '08 election, because I think that foreign policy is very important. Look, I'm not an expert in foreign policy. If I have an expertise, it's more in economics and libertarian personal liberties. But foreign policy is very important because you kill masses of people there. And I thought that if McCain or Romney got in, we'd have a war with China or with everybody. I mean, if there were any people on Mars, we'd start nuking them too. So Obama, I think, is a little bit better than these guys would have been, although contrary to fact, conditionals are hard to tell.
Yeah, and also going back to the Julian Assange or Bradley Manning or this new guy. I mean, with the NSA, I mean, think about it though. It's like, all right, it's like imagine if you had a woman who was raped, for example. Okay, she's the victim. Now she goes to the police to report the crimes, and instead of them arresting the rapist, they arrest the victim for reporting on the crime. That's all Julian Assange and Bradley Manning did. They reported on the crime of what was committed. And yet, the messenger gets shot. Not the people who actually committed crime, but the person, revealing the victimization.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and this sort of reminds me of what happens to women in India. They get raped, and then they get blamed for the rape. I tell my friends who are gun control people, there was this young woman, 30 years old, who was studying to be a doctor, and she was raped and then killed. I asked them, well, do you think it would have been good if she had a gun? And then watch them shut up, because it's sort of embarrassing. Obviously, if they had a gun, she wouldn't have been raped, but horrible situation. I think that's a very good analogy, that the rape victim is blamed for the rape, just like these whistleblowers are blamed for anything. We ought to have a ticker tape parade for them, and we ought to give them a Nobel Peace Prize.
Right, and then one last thing on that subject. I mean, if you think about it, it's like, that's one way you can tell the mainstream news media is in the pocket of the, the ruling elite, is because, like they went after Assange or Bradley Manning. They didn't go after Snowden. They didn't go after the big mainstream, media who actually, published it. I mean, they're the ones who get out to the masses, but yeah, they get off scot-free. It's just, the small, people that report on, the whistleblowers that get smashed down on.
Well, the New York Times is not only too big to fail, but too big to arrest.
Right. Oh, one last thing. Do you think that do you think that Guy Fawkes was the only guy who entered Parliament with good intentions?
I'm sorry, do I think that Guy Fawkes what?
Was the only guy who entered British Parliament with good intentions?
Well, I don't really favor that sort of a thing. I mean, blowing up Parliament or assassinating a leader, I think that would be very counterproductive, because you got to win the hearts and minds of the people, as we talked about in Vietnam. I mean, if we blew up the White House, God forbid, things would be worse. We'd be further away from liberty. I don't favor that sort of a thing. I guess I'm a wuss or something, but I think a much better way to promote liberty is, as we were talking about at the beginning of this hour, with pamphlets, with speeches, with books, with seminars like we're now having, convincing people rationally. Whereas if you just use a gun, what happens is that everyone is against you. So I don't think it's a good idea to blow up Parliament or assassinate leaders or any of that stuff.
Okay, I'm Alan Cassidy.
Hi.
I discovered with Ron Paul's campaign that I was a libertarian. I didn't know it for 30 years.
Great.
Okay. Sorry, they just positioned me.
Sorry, my fault.
They just moved me to where you can see me.
Okay, great.
Can you see me now? Can you see me now?
Yeah, I can see you fine.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned foreign policy because I think one thing that's lacking in the libertarian movement in the States is that there's a less awareness of what's going on outside of the States than there should be. And I pointed out earlier to somebody here that things that happen outside affect what happens here. And I gave the example of 11 or 12 million illegal aliens in here. I was glad to hear you comment about open borders because I agree with that. And there's what happens there affects here in terms of movement of people, plus what happens over there serves as examples here or anywhere, and also increases awareness of different things that are happening there and here, and what's going on with the ruling elite, the international ruling elite, like as in the motivations for Obama bombing Libya, invading Libya, overthrowing Gaddafi based on the fact that he was developing a gold standard himself, and he was going to make a Pan-African coin. And of course, we know that that would have prospered Africa like nobody's business. So I just wanted to thank you for that, and I wanted to thank you for defending the undefendable, because that helped clarify a few things in questions that remained in my libertarian movement and my moving towards pure anarcho-capitalism, something like that. So anyway, could you opine on the foreign affairs aspect to the
Yes,
philosophy?
well, first, let me say I'm proud and honored to be in the same movement as you and all of you. Ron Paul was told many and many a time, yes, we, the conservative Republicans, we agree with you on economics, we have to have free enterprise, and we even agree with you on personal liberties, we've got to legalize drugs, legalize prostitution, whatever. However, if you would just shut up about foreign policy, you'd get more votes. And what Ron Paul said is that, it's sort of like, to put words in his mouth, it's sort of like a three-legged stool, libertarianism. It's domestic policy, economics, it's personal liberties, and it's also foreign policy. And if you try to cut out one of the legs, you don't have a stable philosophy. So I agree with you entirely that foreign policy is very important. Randolph Bourne very famously said that war is the health of the state. Robert Higgs has made great contributions showing that if you try to quantify the amount of regulations, they're always increasing slightly, but then when war comes, they go way up and then they come down a little bit, but we get to a new plateau. So every time we get into a war, we get much more domestic crises, much more domestic regulations, much more taxes. So foreign policy is very, very important, and I'm delighted that Ron Paul never gave up on foreign policy and talked about foreign policy. Foreign policy is very important.
Hi, Professor. How are you? Javier Castro. I have a quick question. It's been a couple of years since I read The Mystery of Banking from Murray Rothbard, but two concepts that kind of stuck out for me was the concept of warehouse banking and loan banking. And in the context of the Cyprus bank seizures, and in the context of our own fraudulent fractional reserve banking, do you see warehouse banking ever making a comeback? Do you see that ever being the policy after the banking system collapses, which it probably eventually will?
Well, I don't know if the banking system will collapse. At one time it would have collapsed because of runs on the bank, but now they have the, what do you call it?
FDIC?
I'm sorry?
The FDIC or?
The FDIC, thanks. You took the word out. I'm losing my marbles here. We now have the FDIC. There was this great movie, what was the one with Jimmy Stewart where they had that bank run?
Mr.
It's a Wonderful Life, they said.
It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart, and they had a bank run there, and that was a very unstable situation, but Now that we have the FDIC, what they'll do is, if a bank gets screwed up because of fractional reserve banking, if it has a bank run, they'll just step on the printing presses. So it won't be unstable in that sense. It'll only be unstable in the German hyperinflation of 23 or the Zimbabwe sense, where they keep pumping money in and eventually the money becomes worthless. Not worth a greenback or the revolutionary money. Will it ever happen? It depends on if we get sanity. If Ron Paul gets elected in 2016, for example, and he appoints me head of the Fed or something, I'll do my best to make it happen. But with all these things, will we ever fully legalize drugs? Will we ever fully legalize prostitution? Will we ever fully legalize markets and use body parts? Will we get rid of rent control? Will we get rid of unions? Will we get rid of minimum wage laws? Will we get rid of high taxes? It all depends upon whether we can convince, not a majority of people. You don't have to convince a majority of people. You have to convince, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% of people. And when you convince the 10, 20, or 30% of people that are the most active in politics, then we will succeed and we will have warehouse banking 100% backed by gold, and then there'll be no more inflation problems. And all of this will come true. So it's hard to say, well, will we get this or will we get that? It depends upon the culture. It depends upon academia. I mean, right now, universities are cesspools of leftism and political correctness, and the same for journalists and TV and radio. So we've got our work cut out for us. But I think that's a very important book, The Mystery of Banking, and I certainly favor 100% banking, no fractional reserve banking, because it's very unstable in this other sense.
Okay, thank you. But one last question, one last thought. Under today's Dodd-Frank rules and laws, is warehouse banking even a possibility today?
Well, I don't know. I'm not lawyer enough to know if it's legal. Suppose I were to set up a new bank.
Right.
And say that my money is gold backed 100%. And now the Walter, we try to circulate the Walter. I think I'd be thrown in jail for, I don't know,
for something.
Fitting or God knows what. I'm not lawyer enough to know which law I'd be breaking, but I'm pretty sure that if I tried that right now, the government would come get me.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Anybody else? Anybody else have questions? Oh, Sevi has a question for you.
Hello, Severian. This is Sevi Fernandez.
Hi.
I got a little question for you. I want to know what's your take on the Dodd-Frank Act and the fact that they're trying to control the way people invest their money. Like you can't hedge anymore when buying a stock or a currency. You can't buy gold, trade gold if you don't have more than $1 million, and things like that. What's your take on that?
Well, this is just one more unjustified and inefficient regulation. Mises used to say that the key element to determine whether a country was free or not is if it had a stock market. Because the Soviet and the Chinese economies wouldn't have a stock market because under socialism, government owns all the means of production. The stock market is private people own the steel mills and the farms and the factories. But what really Mises meant was not just a stock market, but a free stock market where people were free to buy and sell, where you didn't have banking holidays, and you didn't have people stopping trade because the price went higher than they thought it should go, where you had competing stock exchanges, things like that. So I think Dodd-Frank is a very bad thing because it interferes with economic freedom. It interferes with people's right to buy and sell stocks and commodities and bonds. And if you don't have that, you don't really have a free enterprise system. So it's a very crucial part. Some people say, well, if we could only fix one thing, what would we fix? Would we fix education? Would we fix drugs? I think a good point could be made to fix the stock market and make it free as a very important element of economic freedom.
Do you think do they have like a hidden agenda of why they're doing that type of thing?
Yes, I think it's restrictive entry. They want to control things, and the people that are doing the controlling make out like bandits. They make a lot of money from this. They restrict competition in this way. So I think that's a very good point. In economics, we have this thing quo bono. I think it's Latin, maybe Spanish, I don't know. Who benefits? Who benefits from all these laws? And these economic regulations are the big banks, the big corporations, the Wall Street, the too big to fail, the people that get bailed out. They're the ones that are responsible for this, and amazingly enough, they benefit from it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Block. In the comparison of the pregnant woman being able to evict her child, even if it results in killing, if I was born with a Siamese brother, would I? Does the same thing apply? Am I able to evict him from me, even if it kills him?
Oh my God.
That's a good question. I think I published on that very issue.
Okay.
And email me and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
That's a tough one. If there are two Siamese brothers and let's say there's a stronger one, A and B, and if the stronger one rids himself of the other one, I guess the question is, well, who owns the heart and who owns the kidney? And it seems that they're shared now, and I don't know that I've dealt with that problem of Siamese twins in that paper. I'll have to look at the paper again. That's a tough one. And Rotten Cake for challenging me on something that I can't give a quick, satisfactory answer for. But I think it's sort of as if you and I own a tree together. We're partners in a tree. And if you take your half of the tree, my half will die. In other words, it's common ownership. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, we both own something, and if you take your thing and run, then you're stealing my thing.
Yeah.
So if you take, let's say, 2/3 of your heart, or 2/3 of our heart, we're Siamese twins, and you take 3/4 of our lungs, and you can live and I can die, I think, I'd have to think about this more, but I think right off the top of my head, I think you'd be a murderer. Because the property is mutually owned and you can't get it, because if you get it, I die. But I'm not sure of that. I'll have to think about that.
My other question, I'll be teaching economics to seniors next year, and it's a charter school, so I won't have as much freedom as I'd like, but some. So what would be your best bit of advice as a freshman teacher to high school seniors?
Well, I'd rather have a person like you teaching than pretty much anyone else teaching. That's great. This is the sort of a question, should Ron Paul accept matching funds?
Yeah.
Or should you go to a public school and be a teacher? And my answer is, well, should you use the government roads? Should you use government fiat currency, even though we oppose government fiat currency? Should you use the post office, even though we oppose the government monopoly post office? And in this analysis, here I'm on firmer ground, I think, than with the other question about Siamese twins. One of my favorite characters in Atlas Shrugged was a guy named Ragnar Danishkold. He was the pirate. He would attack government ships and government installations and take stuff from them. And my thinking is that he's a good guy. The government is the thief, and it is legitimate to relieve the thief of his ill-gotten gains. So, I used to teach at a public school. I taught at the University of Central Arkansas, and I took a salary. And my justification for it, even though I oppose public education, is, well, the people that have the money stole it, and I am relieving them of their ill-gotten gains. I like to think that I was also doing some good, namely promoting liberty in my classes or promoting rational economics, but that's a side issue. So I would say if you were a Marxist, then you would not be justified in teaching in a public school. Only a libertarian would be justified teaching in a public school or taking a government grant or a government loan or any taking welfare or taking what do you call it, retirement, Social Security. So I think we libertarians can, in justice, take it, whereas those guys can't. Ha-ha.
All right, thank you.
It's me again.
Okay.
I have my own thoughts about evictionism, but I will email those to you and for better explanations. And I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts about the flap about Ron Paul and ronpaul.com. Because in my thoughts, I was kind of surprised that people didn't thought that Ron Paul might be badly motivated in his requesting the ronpaul.com domain. But my take as an IT person, a developer, was that the the entire domain name system is an international and government established virtual kind of thing, which is it's like kind of like fiat currency, and that Ron Paul is definitely justified in using fiat currency, like you just gave the example to the previous questioner. So, but I just wanted to see what you thought about that. I thought, for me, I just thought it was like him using, like you said, using Social Security or fiat currency to take possession of his own name, which was his own name anyway. And so I just wanted to see what you thought about that.
Well, I'm a follower of Stephan Kinsella on IP. I am not a believer in IP. I don't think that intellectual property is legitimate property. I think that the big three are patents, copyrights, and domain names, or what do you call it?
Trademarks.
Trademarks. Thanks.
Yeah, I do agree. I read his stuff, and he convinced me on the issues of intellectual
great.
property, and I agree with it. I just disagree with him on the ronpaul.com controversy. That's where I differ, because of the fact that it's a government artifice, and it's not like a natural property. That's my opinion.
So your view is that if there were a private registration and I first seized the name ronpaul.com, that it would be okay?
No. My take on it is, let me illustrate with the example of the old White Pages phone books. We remember those. Maybe half of the room doesn't, but you and I remember those days. These big fat white pages. There'd be like 100 Ron Pauls in there. No problem at all, because you just look in there and you just find the Ron Paul you want. And it's not this guy, it's not this guy, and you call this guy, and it's not him either. And so by the time you hit the fourth Ron Paul, that's the guy. Actually, in times past, it didn't get much economic traction, but there were like high-level domain name suffixes. Like before there was the government-approved .info, there was a pirate.info that if your ISP accepted using these pirate, call them quote pirates, DNS indexes, you could access a .info that was not like government approved. So in my view of what a free enterprise internet would be, it would be domain name free enterprise, and the government wouldn't be involved in determining who got what.
Well, I agree with you that the government is, an illegitimate institution, and anything that they touch is highly problematic. I would say, though, that if a government cop was stopping a rapist, and I would root for the government cop, because the rapist is governmental in the sense that what the essence of the government is violating the non-aggression principle, and right now the government cop is not engaging in aggression, even though his salary comes from taxes. Right now the big enemy is the rapist. So my point of raising this analogy is that just because the government is involved in something doesn't mean it's necessarily problematic. Like the government now also has records of land titles. Like you have a house, and there's a government registry. It's not a private registry, it's a government registry. And now suppose I invade your house and I trespass and I try to live in your house. And you were to go to the government registry and say, look, I have title to the house, even though it's a government registry. I think you would be justified in doing that. So I'm not that radical that I say just because the government touches it per se, it's a problem. That's one part of my answer. The other part of my answer is the trademark business. Suppose you were to now uh, say that you're Walter Block, and Defending the Undefendable is written by you. And the question, the way I understand Stephen Kinsella's analysis of this is, who could sue you? You're guilty of something, but who could sue you? Can I sue you? No, I can't sue you because you didn't do anything to me. You just took my name. But let's say you now sell the book to Louis Rivera. Louis can sue you because you're contractually related to him, but you're not contractually related to me. So these are complexities of the issue. You're probably more of an expert on IP than I am since you're in that field, but that's my understanding of the Kinsella type analysis. I hope that's of some help to you.
It is, as far as your take on it. I just wanted to point out that I think it's more like a government guaranteed monopoly, like as in I guarantee you a trademark, rather than the rapist and the cop. That's okay.
Well, it's an analogy. It's imperfect analogy, I guess.
Hi, Doctor. If you were the king of the United States and you could write one law or abolish one law tomorrow to make this country a more free and prosperous place, what would it be?
Well, there's a problem with that. The problem with that is what the hell is it called? I'm losing my mind. Marginal. It's the paradox of value. In economics, the question is, why is it that diamonds are so valuable, even though if we lost all the diamonds in the world, life would go on pretty much as it is, whereas a cup full of water is worth virtually nothing. And yet, if all the water disappeared, we'd all die. So this is in economics called the paradox of value. And the solution to it is to look at it marginally. Namely, we're never in a position to choose between all water and all diamonds. If we were, then all water would be worth way more than all diamonds. But we only choose a little marginal bit of each. So what your question is, it's really not a marginal question, but an all or none question. You say, what one thing, if we got rid of or changed, would do it? And the problem with that is that you're not looking at it from a marginal point of view, so there are problems. Any answer I give you, you could say, well, what about this? If I say education, you say, well, what about money? If I give you money, you say, what about taxes? If I give you taxes, you could say something else. I'm not sure what to say. I don't think there's a right answer to the question. It's sort of like, can God create a rock so big that he can't move it? Yeah. One of these puzzle kind of questions. So all I can do is say, since I'm an academic, they say when you meet a shoemaker, he looks at your shoes first. Yeah. When you meet a jeweler, he looks at your jewelry first. Well, I'm an academic, so I would say education. If I were king of the United States, I would shape up education. But I'm open to the fact that, well, if you just shaped up education, we get screwed with taxes, we get screwed with this, we get screwed with that. So I can't really give a good answer. I can just give, I like Mozart. I like education. Okay. Because that's my background. All right. So I hope that helps. It's the best I can do on that rough question.
All right.
Hi, Dr. Block. Javier Castro again.
Hi.
Hi. One quick question. If an organization or an individual was trying to focus on basically advancing libertarian and Austrian theory and trying to attract younger people, or basically anybody that would listen, what do you think are the biggest bullet points one should focus on? Is it, for example, inflation, cronyism, which bullet points resonate better, or do people get better than others?
Well, your question is very similar to the previous one, only you're asking for a few instead of one. But I would say you have to tailor it to your audience. If you're speaking to educators, you talk about education. If you're speaking to farmers, you talk about farming. one of the great things about Ron Paul is, he would speak to people about the thing where they were dependent upon the state. So if he were speaking to farmers, he'd say we got to get rid of the farm program. If he was speaking to educators, he'd say we've got to have public education. Whereas most politicians would steer clear of challenging people. So like if I was speaking to doctors, I would say we've got to get rid of occupational licensure, which would be the most challenging thing. But that's my personality. Sort of, smack them.
Yeah.
Rather than, be nice. I mean, there are two ways of trying to convert people. One is, you try to say, well, let's go marginally, let's, fix the post office because that's not too controversial. And then let's do this and let's do that. My own personality is let's privatize roads, which is very shocking to most people that they can't believe that, or the anarchist thing. So I would say you have to tailor it to your audience, and either you tailor it to your audience in a confrontational way or in a non-confrontational way. And my personality is very confrontational, so I would hit them, smack them in the mouth with stuff that they don't like. I've been accused of a thing called macho flash. That this is not the way to convert people. But who is the biggest macho flasher? Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand was the person who would, picture between the eyes with her views, and Ron Paul too. He was his personality was low key, but he was pretty radical. And these are two people that have converted more people to libertarianism than anyone else. Remember, I took that survey. I asked who was here because of Ron Paul, and maybe 2/3 of the group said that they were. So that would be my answer to your question.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Hey there.
Hey.
I assume that because you're a libertarian, you're against most government regulation. Is that correct?
Well, not all government regulations. I like the law against murder. I like the law against rape.
Okay.
The law
All
against
right. Yeah.
theft.
Okay. So what I was going to ask you is, well, I know the jury, as you said before, is probably still out for global warming, but for things that are harmful to the environment that we know, like for sure, like people who dump toxic chemicals into the ocean, stuff like that, and things that we know are harmful. How, in a libertarian society, how are we supposed to take care of things like that if there is no government to regulate them? How do we stop people from cutting corners to make profit that harm other people?
Well, you see, you're really asking a double-edged question, or you're really asking two questions at once, and I like to deal with one question at a time.
Okay.
So let's let me break down your question into what I see as the two constituent elements, or the two parts of it. So let's get off environmentalism now and say, well, how do we stop theft if there's no government?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I'll get to the question of environmental trespass. How do we stop theft or rape if there's no government? Well, I'm in New Orleans, and we have this park called Audubon Park. It's a big, beautiful park, and if you go in there at 2 in the morning, unless you're a mugger, you're in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And you have also, what do you call it, Disney World, which is also a big park. Where are you safer, in Disney World or in Audubon Park or Central Park of New York City? You're much safer in Audubon Park, because in Audubon Park, you're much safer in Disney World, because in Disney World, if a murder or a rape or a theft occurs, people won't go there. So what they have is ducks and mice packing heat, and if you act funny, they come and grab you. Namely, there are now more non-government police than there are government police. In most shopping malls, you're pretty safe because there are private cops there. Whereas the government cops, what they're busy doing is stopping you from doing drugs or arresting you for victimless crimes. Whereas the private cops are trying to safeguard you because their employers want you to be safeguarded, so you'll be a customer. Okay, so that's the question of, if we didn't have government, would we be less safe?
Yeah.
I think we'd be more safe. We'd have private cops. Okay, now, with regard to environmental rapes, instead of person-to-person rapes, well, it's the same thing. If we see you dumping toxic waste into the river, the owner of the river is going to be very upset with you, and he's going to have cameras around his river, or he's going to have people looking, and if they catch you, they're going to kick your butt. they're going to go to a private court and arrest you and put you in jail for doing that. It's called a trespass. Similarly, if you just have an ordinary smokestack, an ordinary factory, and you have smoke and it gets into other people's lungs and livers and their clothes, well, the people who are victimized by this, they go to the court, and the court will pretty much uphold the rights of the victim and make the perpetrator stop it. Whereas what the government does is it says, oh, well, they're too big to fail, or we have to allow them to do this. And then they have the Clean Air Act, and now they have this all these environmental regulations, like trying to save species. So if you find some species on your farm, you better shut up about it. Shoot it, shut up, and shoot, shovel, and shut up. Because if you find it, they'll seize your property. So I think the answer to environmental and all problems is not the government, but rather private enterprise and property owners.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Block, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Robert Novell. Two questions. Hi. Two questions for you. First, I'd like if you could follow up and elaborate on an answer that Eric, an answer of yours of a question of Eric's earlier, where you suggested that in the case of public education, a libertarian would be justified in taking a position and accepting government.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. I'm not hearing you. Maybe can you get closer to the microphone or something? I'm sort of missing half your words.
Okay. Let me start over again. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, good. Okay, a follow-up, if you would, on a question that Eric asked you earlier with regards to public education. I believe you suggested that in taking a position at a school as a teacher, a libertarian would be justified in taking such a position and accepting government funds, but a Marxist wouldn't. Could you elaborate on that for me a little bit?
Yeah. Well, two parts. Why would a libertarian be justified, and why would a Marxist not be justified? Well, the libertarian would be justified because, according to his theory, if he takes money from government, that's good. When the criminals have less money, that's justified because they stole the money. And like if I steal money from you and now you come and repossess it, that's justice.
Okay.
So
But how
from
is
the
the
libertarian
Marxist
perspective,
unjustified?
that's a justified thing. Now, from the Marxist point of view, if they're going to be consistent with their own crappy theory, they can't do that because they don't see the government as a thief. So if they don't see the government as a thief, what they're doing is promoting Marxism with your and my money, without stolen money.
No, wait a minute. I'm not making myself clear here. I'm talking about a case where the prospective teacher, whether a Marxist or libertarian, is not intent on promoting their particular ideology, but for example, only teaching biology or teaching mathematics or something of that nature.
I see. I misunderstood you. Thanks for the correction. Well, I would say that nobody, in some sense, nobody is justified in teaching in a public school because there shouldn't be any public school.
I agree.
But given that there are public schools, I would say that the Marxist or the libertarian are equally justified in teaching a non-controversial issue like math or Spanish or some foreign language or what have you, chemistry.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Hi, Dr. Block. Hey there.
Hey.
What do you think about Stephen Molyneux's approach to libertarianism and promoting it, like in regards to a person's personal life or the family or libertarian parenting? Supporting like Montessori schools over public or even maybe private schools, or not hitting / spanking your kids. What is your take on that?
Well, unfortunately, Stephen Molyneux just got cancer. Did you people hear about that?
Yes.
And I was supposed to debate him in an upcoming conference
Right.
in Vancouver, Canada. We were going to debate about that plus, the advisability or morality of politics. So my heart goes out to him, and I wish him well. And I'm a big fan of his on most things, but I disagree with him on those two issues. Let's take spanking first. Now, we do have the non-aggression principle, and the non-aggression principle says, you can't use violence against innocent people, but I think children are a different kind of a thing in all political philosophies. Children are different. You can't use adult laws for children because children are not fully developed human beings. For example, if you don't brush your teeth, I can't spank you or do anything to you. You're an adult. But if my 4-year-old kid won't, what do you call it, brush his teeth or drink his milk or play safely or whatever it is, I have to be able to do something to stop him. Now, spanking wouldn't be the first thing, but I might call a timeout. But if I called a timeout on you, that would be kidnapping. Because a timeout means, I'm prohibiting you from doing anything. You just have to stand there. Suppose I said, well, I don't like the color of your T-shirt. I'm giving you a timeout. You have to stand there. You can't do anything. Well, that would be assault and battery. So the Stephen Molyneux view, I don't know, it comes down to you can't raise children. I think it's crazy. Now, of course, if you engage in child abuse, a severe whipping, well, then you ought to go to jail for that. But I think any reasonable parent should be able to cut the allowance or have a timeout or spank in the worst case scenario. When I have 2 children, a boy and a girl, and when my son was about 3, he threw sand in his sister's eyes. I don't know. I didn't want him to get away with that. My daughter was crying, and I wanted to throw sand in his face to show him how it felt. My wife wouldn't let me, but that's a whole other issue. But the point is, I think I would have been justified, not in beating the crap out of him or engaging in child abuse, but just showing him what it meant to throw sand in someone's eyes to protect my daughter, and also to teach him, not to do that. Certainly, I would have been justified in giving him a timeout or, in some way demonstrating to him that this is not an appropriate thing to do. So I disagree with Stephen Molyneux there. I also disagree with him on politics. I don't think that, and here I divide my remarks in 2. One is engaging in politics per se a violation of the non-aggression principle, and 2, is it efficacious? Well, on the efficacious one, that's easy. I mean, Ron Paul did magnificently. He's promoting liberty like very few people in the history of the universe have ever done. So certainly efficacious. Did he do something immoral? Not immoral. Did he violate the non-aggression principle by getting up on his hind legs behind a podium and saying, I'm running for president? I don't see it. He didn't pull a trigger and shoot anyone. He didn't punch anyone in the nose. I even go so far as to say he should accept matching funds, which he didn't, but that's a whole different issue. But just merely running for mayor or dog catcher, I don't think it's a per se violation of the non-aggression principle. Therefore, I think Stephen Molyneux is wrong on that. But again, he's within my family. I greatly admire him. He's a magnificent theoretician of anarcho-capitalism, and I take my hat off to him, and I wish him well in his health issues.
Well, one last thing. Speaking of Stephen, Ron Paul, he was saying that, I come across some anarcho-capitalists that say, well, on one hand, it'd be great if we had like some red button that we could just press, and that'd be great if we just automatically have, full, anarchy, private property anarchy. But then I come across other people that say, well, wait a minute. It's such a Stephen Molyneux. They say, well, wait a minute. If we do that, there's going to be a lot of people hurt in the process. Maybe we should take a more, long-term approach, like whittling it down. Like, for example, you're going to have people on like social welfare programs, and parents, and have kids in public schools who would be dramatically hurt if those things, those benefits or whatever would be cut out. So what I'm getting at though is, do you think it would, it's still anarcho-capitalism, but do you think that it should be done faster or sooner? Like, for example, Ron Paul, he was in support of getting rid of Social Security or the Federal Reserve, but he dramatically promoted the auditing the Federal Reserve. In his case, in ending the Fed, it was about just kind of slowly doing it over time, and also Social Security saying, well, If I become president, if you're like under 25 or something, you can decide whether you want to be in Social Security or not. So do you support the quick, fast result if that could be the case, or slow, minimizing over time?
Well, in Austrian economics, we have an expression, praxeology, namely, is it logically coherent? Is it necessary? This isn't praxeology. There's no, it's just a matter of prudential judgment. And different people have different judgment as to whether you should go slow or fast, whether you should be hostile or friendly, or I think it depends on people's styles. My own view, I tend toward the blistering your thumb on the button that stops everything. The problem is that if you do it gradually, the forces on the other side will mobilize and stop you from doing anything. So it's sort of an empirical issue. It's a matter of prudential judgment. My own judgment is if I had the power to stop Social Security right now, or welfare, or whatever it was, well, it wouldn't be the first thing I'd stop. Other people asking, which thing do you do first, or which is the most important. What Ron Paul said, and I agree with him entirely, is you would bring the troops home. You bring the troops home, you save trillions of dollars, and you stop murder. So I would favor that. I mean, the first thing you do is the most egregious violations of liberty, and the most egregious violations of liberty are the U.S. imperialist wars. You stop that, and then you cut back on all these other things. And I think his gradual process for getting rid of Social Security, namely paying off older people my age and in the 70s, I don't know, it's not exactly my style. I veer toward the more radical, but you can't have perfect agreement on these strategic issues. It's sort of like saying, well, you have $1 million. Should you give it to set up a new PhD program in economics, or should you give it to the Mises Institute, or should you give it to the Free State Project? I don't know. It's really hard to say which is the best way to do it. These, as I say, the matters of prudential judgment. People of good minds or good hearts or what have you can disagree on that. I can just give you my opinion, which I don't say should be the model for anyone else.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Block. It's been a pleasure. I've been reading material and watching YouTube videos all the time, and I'll be sure to get you a new Defending the Undefinable book when it comes out. Thanks.
Great.
All right. Do you think Ron Paul is an anarcho-capitalist hidden as a constitutional conservative, or what?
Did you say Ron Paul or Rand Paul?
Ron.
No.
Rand first.
Ron Paul?
Go ahead, both.
Oh, okay, both. Well, I don't know about Ron. I think he's got some anarchist tendencies, but what he says is that he's a limited government libertarian, and I guess I have to take him at his word, although every once in a while he'll say something that's very anarchistic. Now, Rand Paul is a horse of a different color, or a different generation, or whatever. Rand Paul says he's a constitutional conservative. He says he's not a libertarian, he's a libertarian republic. I'm not sure what that means, but Rand is a lot less radical than Ron. I'm much closer to Ron. What I've done is I've rated these people, and I've given Ron a 97 on my libertarian meter, and I've given Rand a 70, and also, what's the name of the guy who ran for
Gary
LP?
Johnson.
Gary Johnson. Gary Johnson also a 70, and these other people, Justin A. Nash, and I've given, all around a 60 or a 70 or something like that. Ron is head and shoulders above all these other people in terms of radicalism. I don't know that he's an anarchist or not. I've not talked to him about that. But he has some tendencies. Also, Mises had some anarchist tendencies too about the secession down to the individual level. Although Mises said other things that weren't anarchistic. Murray Rothbard was a very clear anarchist, as am
How do you feel about Alex Jones?
Alex, he's the very outspoken guy?
Yeah.
Oh, he's great. Oh, he was great. He was once on the show of who's that twit from Britain?
Pierce
Pierce Morgan.
That's it. He was once on his show and he wouldn't shut up. The way Pierce Morgan treats other people. So I'm a big fan of Alex Jones. He's magnificent. He wouldn't shut up and he kept saying great things. Oh, he's great. And also this new guy, the wrestler, Kane.
Yeah.
He's running for Senate, or we're trying to push him to run for Senate. He's also very good. So there are a lot of good people out there, and hopefully people in this room and your room in Florida, some of you will be running for an office or getting PhDs and becoming professors or writing or what have you. We've got a very, very powerful movement, and hopefully we'll have some breakthroughs.
All right, thank you.
All right, Dr. Block, we have a question from Nelson Obeso.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. I'd like to. Hi, how are you? I'd like to ask from a practical perspective. Given that communist China has 20 to 25% of the world's population, and they're mainly all slave labor, keeping trade practices and open trade as libertarians profess it, how can the American middle class compete with that many people working for practically nothing?
Well, slave labor, I think, might have applied to China 10, 20, 30 years ago. I don't think it applies to them now. I wouldn't say there is free enterprise in the U.S. That would be going too far, but slave labor, China has made magnificent strides toward free enterprise. I think a better case in point might be North Korea, where the slave labor appellation might apply better. Now, you're really asking two questions, or at least I infer two questions. One, what's the moral issue of trading with slave labor countries like North Korea or China in 10, 20, 30 years ago? And what's the utilitarian effect? I think the utilitarian effect is very clear. Have free trade. Don't have tariffs, because look, the United States is in some senses worse than North Korea. I'm just talking about the moral issue now. How many people has the North Korean people killed? How many foreign people has North Korea killed? How many atom bombs has North Korea dropped on anyone? How many, okay, look, the North Koreans aren't too good to their domestic citizens, very bad, but they're not killing masses of people. So in a sense, maybe the North Koreans shouldn't trade with us because we're the bad guys. Okay, that's the moral issue. The economic issue, I think there's a fallacy here, and the idea that I teach my freshman students, and this is sort of a basic premise of all economics, is you don't look at absolute advantage, you look at comparative advantage. The idea here is, let's say we shouldn't trade with the Mexicans because they can work cheaper than us, so we shouldn't trade with the Bolivians because they can work cheaper than us. This is a fallacy. Just because we have an absolute advantage over, say, Mexico in all goods, doesn't mean that trade won't be worthwhile, because we only have a comparative advantage over them in some things. Namely, in some things we might be 10 times better than them in. In other things we might only be twice as good as them in. So it would be very silly for us not to trade with them, and we could let them do the things that we're only twice as good as they are, and we'll do the things that we're 10 times better than them. Let me give you an example of this. Suppose that you're a lawyer, and you're thinking of hiring a typist, but you're much better typist than the typist is. But as a lawyer, you can make $1,000 a day, and a typist gets $100 a day. So where would you be better off, trading with the typist or not trading with the typist? If you don't trade with the typist and you have 2 days, in one day you become a lawyer, you make $1,000, and the next day you make $100 from typing, because let's say you have to spend as much time typing as lawyering to type up all the things that you lawyer about. So at the end of 2 days you have $1,100, namely $1,000 from typing, $1,000 from lawyering, and $1,000 from typing. If you do trade with a typist who is much inferior to you in everything, she can't do lawyering, and you're a better typist than she is, or as good, Well, if you do trade with her, then you get 2 days of lawyering for 1,000 plus 1,000 or 2,000. And if you hire her for 2 days as a typist, you have to pay her $200. You end up at 1,800. So 1,800 is better than 1,100. So even though the Mexicans or the North Koreans or whoever it is can't do as well as we can, it still pays for us to trade with them. So it's a fallacy to say, well, the Chinese or the Mexicans or whoever it is will take all our jobs if they can work cheaper than us. Just because they can work cheaper than us, namely they're less efficient than we are, doesn't mean we shouldn't trade with them.
Well, you explained the theory to me, but I wanted the practical end of it. When I said slave labor, maybe you were thinking of the moral part of it. I'm looking more at the standard of living of the American in 1950 or 55, maybe even 60, compared to today. We've gone downhill because we now have more of a corporatism type of laissez-faire, whatever we have now. We've gone down in standard of living over the last half century. The Chinese have also gone down, but the Chinese have survived, if you will, the biggest state-sponsored genocide in the history of humankind. Nevertheless, the reality is that a lot of what they make comes here, we buy it, and it doesn't help them. It doesn't help the majority of the people in China. It helps the 1% over there. And yes, it would be great to improve the Chinese, but if we're not in a position where we have a good standard of living here, we will not have a free government and freedom here, or liberty. It will cease to exist as we know it today. How can we bring back a higher standard of living vis-a-vis the Chinese?
Well, I think you and I have serious disagreements on these issues. First of all, I don't think that we're worse off economically than we were 50 years ago, and I certainly don't think the Chinese are worse off now than 50 years ago. 50 years ago, they were having mass starvation. Nowadays, they're having great investment. They're having high-rise apartment houses, high-rise offices. They're doing very well compared to 50 years ago, and I think we're doing a little bit better than 50 years ago, despite the best actions of the government to undermine the economy. I mean, just look at cars. You compare a car now with a car in 1955. You got air conditioning now. You got all sorts of stuff. We didn't even have air conditioning in those days. Look at the computer revolution. I mean, just transportation. If I would have wanted to have this conference with you in 1955, I would have had to go to Florida. Now I'm in Canada. I'm in Western Canada, and we're communicating not perfectly, but pretty well. So I think both countries are doing better, and the reason we're not doing even better is because of the government. But there are two issues: one, the moral, and the other, the economic. And on the economic, I think the points that I made about comparative advantage versus absolute advantage are that's my point. And with regard to the ethics of it, you see, you're looking at us as the good guys and them as the bad guys. But I'm asking you to reverse that. I mean, I'm saying the U.S. in some sense is worse than North Korea, or worse than China, worse than the Soviet Union. We've killed more innocent people than they have. So if there's anyone that shouldn't be trading with anyone on that ground, they shouldn't be trading with us. But I guess we'll have to agree to disagree because we're very far apart on both of these issues.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Block. I guess one last question. This is Phil Santa Maria. I told you about him. He's a teacher, remember, at Christopher Columbus. It's a Catholic high school, and he's a Austro-libertarian. So here he is.
How's it going, Dr. Block?
Hey, good to speak to you.
Hey, a quick question. I heard that you like to be libertarian up front to people and not be so incremental about change. How do you feel about counter-economics and agorism, the Samuel Konkin style?
Well, Sam Konkin died very too early. He died at a young age. He was a very brilliant guy. He made some very good contributions to intellectual property even before Stephen Kinsella. I knew him personally in New York, a very nice guy. The counter-economics and the left-wing libertarianism, Roderick Long is into that, and some other people about the sort of left libertarian stuff and libertarian thickism. Namely, we shouldn't be thin libertarians. Namely, we shouldn't just look at the non-aggression principle. We should look at other issues, feminism and other things like that. I'm not a fan of that at all. And the whole idea of counter-economics, where you don't buy and sell with the general population, but you sort of just buy and sell among the libertarian group, well, then we lose specialization and division of labor if we do that. And this idea of thickism, you know, there's left-wing thickists, and then there's right-wing thickists. Thickists saying that, you know, libertarianism implies more than the non-aggression principle. It implies a certain view on feminism, a certain view on homosexuality, and a certain view on, I don't know, change or whatever. Cultural, you have to be cosmopolitan. But the right-wing thickists are just the exact opposite. Like the left-wing thickists say we have to be open to homosexuality. The right-wing thickists, like Hans Hoppe, say, you know, they're a bunch of bums, we should get rid of them. But I don't think either of them has anything to do with libertarianism. I think I do have an article attacking both of them. I say libertarianism is unique, it's neither right nor left. It was in the Journal of Libertarian Studies. And that's my view on that, you know, pure plumb line libertarianism says, don't aggress against anyone or their private property, period. And you can hate homosexuals or you can love homosexuals. You can love feminism or hate feminism. You can love checkers or chess or hate checkers or chess. It's got nothing to do with libertarianism. And I think both of these, the right-wing thick libertarians and left-wing thick libertarians, are trying to pervert libertarianism. They're trying to take it over for their own nefarious purposes. Look, suppose I were to say that if you were a true libertarian, you have to love Mozart. I mean, you know, that's crazy. First of all, it wouldn't be very good strategically because not everybody likes Mozart. Some people like rap music. Or if I were to say, well, if you like rap music, you can't be a libertarian. Well, then we lose all the rap people. And they do the same thing with religion. Some of them say, well, if you're religious, you can't be a libertarian, like the Randians. And other people say, if you're irreligious, you can't be a libertarian. Well, it's crazy. Belief in God is neither here nor there as far as libertarianism. It's orthogonal to libertarianism. So I'm not a fan of Kangen on that sense.
As far as the maybe counter economics by using a different currency, how do you feel about that? You know, a borderless, like we mentioned earlier, Bitcoin, how it can really subvert things like the Federal Reserve and other central banks.
Well, I made a hierarchy, gold here, Bitcoin here, and U.S. fiat currency way below. So I'm sort of a semi-supporter of Bitcoin, but I really favor the gold standard.
All right. Thanks for the
Well, it's been about 2 hours now, and I'm sort of running out of steam. And I hope everybody's had a good time.
Thank you, Dr. Locke.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Block.
Thank you, Louis.
All right. Well, you heard the applause. Sorry, I was over there in the back. But well, I'll see you at the Mises University, actually, with Eric. He's over there somewhere.
And I'll see you at Loyola.
Yes, definitely. And if anyone else wants to join me, they're welcome, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, he caught me off guard there. Oh, I wanted to say a few things. Let's see what I have. I put down some notes. Sorry, Kate, I know you were...
Hey, did you record that? You know it's still recording now?
And they got it.
We're so